Good. So I'll just do a very brief introduction. Petros, thank you for joining us. For those of you who don't know him, Petros Koutrakis he's a real pioneer in exposure assessment, and for many years he's developed new measurement techniques, in particular for air pollution exposure, ambient, microenvironmental, personal, working on different ways of integrating this information into human studies and personal exposure assessment. And he has some new ideas that he'll be telling us about today. Petros has been he's on our external advisory committee for our P30 Center, and has been a tremendous help to us over the years. And when he was here last winter, all he could talk about at dinner was particle radiation and radon. So we've taken him up on his opportunity to tell us a little bit about this, and we're hoping there may be some collaboration that comes out of it. So with that, take it away, Petros.
Thank you, Rob. It's a great pleasure to be with you. USC, it's a friendly place for me. It's always great to be there and visit. I had a few students that they have served on your faculty. So it's a pleasure to discuss about our research. Today, I'm going to focus on something which is relatively new. We started about 5 years ago to think about particle radioactivity, and then as we were doing this kind of research, we thought about radon, and then we thought about cosmic radiation, and there is no end. And when you try to find new things come up, and it's just a little bit serendipitous. Today, I'm going to talk about environmental radiation, exposure assessment, biomarkers, health effects, and conclusions. Some of the work I will present, it's very recent, and so you probably are not familiar with it. We have started the program on environmental radiation effects, and we are all familiar with the solar and cosmic radiation. Solar is what comes from outside the Earth, from the solar system. Outside the solar system, there is a lot of radiation that also reaches the Earth. And then also we have terrestrial radiation. We are familiar with radon, but also there is direct gamma radiation that comes from the Earth. There is uranium-238, which is an alpha emitter. There is potassium-40, which is a beta emitter. So there is plenty of radiation that comes from the Earth as well, the terrestrial radiation. There are many ways to study the impacts of environmental radiation, and we have done all of above. First of all, direct radiation from outside the Earth can affect human health. One example we all know is UV B light and skin cancer, for instance. Also, terrestrial radiation can affect directly human health. For instance, gamma radiation that comes from the Earth can also have an effect on skin cancer. And then there is solar radiation that affects air pollution, which affects human health. We have written a paper where we found the formation of ultrafine particles related to cosmic radiation. And there are many other papers that discuss this topic. Also, terrestrial radiation can affect the air pollution, like ionization of air pollutants from terrestrial radiation can form new air pollutants. So there is kind of an effect from these sources. And finally, we have found that cosmic radiation modifies the effect of air pollution. Like, one paper we published last year talked about the effects of ozone on lung function. And when the solar activity is stronger, the effects of ozone are stronger. And when the activity is low, the effect is lower. And the reason is that solar radiation affects the pineal gland, which is responsible for the production of melatonin. Melatonin is an antioxidant. And there are a couple of papers from China, actually, they show that when the melatonin levels are low, the effects of ozone on humans is stronger. So there is evidence that solar radiation can really modify the effects of air pollution. And also there is evidence that terrestrial radiation can affect the impacts of air pollution. And one example is when radon is emitted, it decays in the air. The ultrafine progeny attaches to particles, make the particles radioactive, and then the particles are more toxic to health. So that's another example where terrestrial radiation can modify the effects of air pollution. So in terms of the total radiation, ionizing radiation, and it's the radiation that when hits a molecule produces an ion. That's the definition of ionizing radiation, which is actually very harmful. In United States, we receive between few millisieverts to even 6-7 millisieverts of total radiation per year. It depends if you're in California or in Massachusetts or in the Midwest. And these types of radiation we can be exposed include internal inhalation. That's what we breathe, and internal by ingestion. That's what we eat. And then we have external from cosmic exposure that goes to our skin and does not go inside, and external from terrestrial radiation. Now, most of radiation we receive is by inhalation, and under normal circumstances, most of that radiation is related to radon. So much of the radiation we receive inside internal radiation comes from inhalation and of particles that they carry the progenies of radon, and also the radon gas. So I'm going to talk a little bit today about radon and health, particulate radioactivity, and also air pollution. And just to refresh our memories, the radon comes from the uranium chain. It has a half-life of 3.8 days. When it decays, it produces an alpha particle, and then produces other progeny. They are alpha or beta or gamma emitters. The ultrafine radioactive material, which is produced from the decay of the alpha, the radon, attached to ambient particles, and then we inhale the ambient particles. The ambient particles, they can emit inside our human body alpha, gamma, and beta. Alpha is the radiation that we believe causes the most of the effects. It has a low linear energy transfer, which means that as soon it's released from a particle, it kills or harms the cells next to the particle. It does not go much farther as the beta and gamma inside the human body, but it reaches the cells just outside where the particle is, and this can cause DNA damage, or it can cause inflammation, peroxidation, and all sorts of bad things. So now the three types of radiation. Alpha radiation is 2 protons and 2 neutrons. It's a it's a helium nucleus, and the alpha cannot really penetrate a paper because it's big and energetic. So the only way we can get alpha inside our body is through inhaling a radon gas or particles that they carry radon progeny. Okay, so the particles, they act as vectors inside the human body, and as they go to the lungs or penetrate through the lungs and become systemic, as they go, they blink and they produce alpha, and that alpha in situ damages the cells. Beta can penetrate paper, but does not penetrate aluminum, and gamma can go through paper, aluminum, and lead. So beta can have some penetration through the skin, and gamma definitely can penetrate through the skin. So the radon decay produces two types of isotopes or radionuclides. The red ones are, we call them short-lived because they, within minutes, seconds, or even hours, they decay, they carry a lot of energy, and once we inhale them, they just release much of their energy within hours. And we measure this in becquerels per cubic meter, decays per second per cubic meter of air we breathe. And then we have formation of a lead-210, has a half-life of 20 years. Things cool down, and then we have a slow decay. So if you take a filter that you collect from the air and you collect particles, and you measure that filter as soon as possible, you put it after a spectrometer, you can measure a lot of radiation. If you leave the filter a few hours or few days, then the filter cools down, and then you can measure slow radiation come out of the filter for years. So if we take the filters to the laboratory and we store them, then we don't really measure the high energy that comes out of the filters. And what we need to keep in mind is that the fresh particles that they are always generated in the air, we inhale them and they release the alpha radiation. And that probably causes the acute effects we find, which are within 1 or 2 days, okay, the acute effects, as compared to the chronic effects when the particles go throughout the body and stay there for a long time. For instance, in the brain, they can stay for life, and slowly they release alpha, beta, and gamma radiation. Something important to mention here is that radon, the gas, it's inert. So it goes inside the human body, and 99% of the 0.9% of the radon comes out. Very small amount of radon is accumulated on the fatty tissues and the bone marrow, okay? But most of the radiation we get in our body is through the particles that they carry the progeny of radon. Now, the dosimetry, we know from for the lung cancer is mostly related to the radon progeny. And that's the reason we have the dosimetry and where the attached and unattached particles deposit and how they cause lung cancer. Unfortunately, radon is considered only as a risk for lung cancer. To some extent, there is some literature that talks about skin cancer, and there are some very, very few papers, very sketchy, that they talk about other effects of radon, radon progeny. Radon itself, the gas, has not been really studied carefully about its dosimetry and where it accumulates. So radon is considered as a cancer risk, and mostly because of the progeny. What we are learning the last few years that radon is not just responsible for cancer, but it can cause all sorts of effects we find for particles. And also the progeny is not only responsible for the effects, but also the gaseous radon that accumulates on different adipose tissues can also cause problems. So a few years ago, we started with a hypothesis that particles act as vectors of radionuclides, which are, after inhalation, go throughout the body and they release energy. And these particles can really cause radiation both locally and systemically. And in the absence of anthropogenic sources, particle radioactivity is related to radon chain. So let's talk a little bit about exposure assessment. We are used with the particles, ozone criteria, pollutants. We can do epidemiology. Unfortunately, when you want to do radon or particle radioactivity epidemiology, things are very limited. So we really had to start, we had to create new data sets on the national level so we can do the right health studies. So what we had until a few years ago in terms of the radon, we had these EPA measurements done in the around 80s, which were taken by the Lawrence Berkeley Laboratory, which was a pioneer group that dealt with radon back then. They developed a kind of a model and which predicts radon by county. No temporal variability. They assume that the radon does not change with time. And also the resolution was very, very coarse. It was county. Some of the epidemiological studies done in the past in the United States, they had done exposure assessment based on these kind basic data sets. And this is the reason some good papers on radon did not really make it to high impact journals, because the exposure assessment was very rudimentary. Now, on the right side of my figure here, you see Eastern Massachusetts and New England, and you see the counties. In Massachusetts, we have 11, 12 counties, Vermont. So here is the uranium, which is a precursor of radon by county. And on the right, we have the uranium by zip code. So you see that if you go down to zip code level, you see that there is a special variability of radon, which is not captured by the Lawrence Berkeley estimates that we have used in the past. So what we did a couple of years, 3 years ago, we approached commercial companies across the United States. We collected about 4 million measurements from these companies, and we developed we compiled this database. They come from different methods. We had to calibrate, we had to clean the data, and after doing that, we developed spatial temporal models that they predict radon at the zip code level and monthly. And these models do not just use the radon, but they use almost 80 different variables, the radon potential of the soil, uranium concentration in the soil, moisture type of the geology, because uranium, radon does not only come from basalt and granitic materials, but also it can come from even calcium carbonate. So we use many, many predictors to create these models. Now, something that is happening right now, CDC is collecting data from the same sources we are getting our data, but what they do, they just take the data and they put them online and they store them. First, if you don't use a model, you don't have full coverage of space and time, so it's hard to do epidemiology. But also, this data they don't calibrate them from, the different methods. So you might be able to find data at CDC, especially maybe from a year from now, but this is not a spatial temporal model that I'm showing you here. So then last year, we took about 10 million samples. The first models we developed that is in press now includes 21 states in the northeastern and midwestern United States. Summer basement, winter basement. The houses are less ventilated during the winter, so they have a much more, higher exposures as compared to the summer. The basement has more radon than above ground. So and you can see that there is a lot of spatial variability. So now we took 10 million samples during the period 2000-2020. We developed models that they predict zip code and month. And here is, I don't know if I can run this. Okay. So you can see now June, August, September, November. So this is the basement on the left. On the right is above ground. You see that there is more radon in the basement. You see that there is a large area in the Midwest and the mountain area with high radon. You see that there is a seasonal variability that we show, but if we stay and we go through the 20 years, you'll realize also that there is a year-to-year variability. And, before people thought, okay, radon is natural, does not really change with time. So if we have a measurement by county, we don't need to worry about the future. However, what we find is that the levels of ozone longitudinally can change. They can change, for instance, because people use more mitigation, right? So in that case, the levels will go down, or they can change because the houses are bigger and the basements are bigger. So we also can have more radon. Weather changes also affect radon. Less snow and more rain, for instance, can increase radon. So you really need data which are both spatially and temporally varied. So that's the model for radon. We hope by September to have this available for people who want to do all sorts of epidemiology across the United States. Also, we wanted to do studies about, of particle radioactivity. And the first thing we thought some time ago was that how about if we take the old filters we have saved and measure the radiation? You remember I told you we have two types of measurements: the fresh particles, a lot of radiation released within hours, and then we have the long-lived radionuclides. Emissions are lower, but they last for years. Okay, so short, high, long, low. We took stored filters from Boston, and you can measure the alpha and beta activity using spectrometry. And then if you know when the sample was collected, and if you assume that the decay is controlled by lead-210, which is a beta emitter, but it releases polonium, which is an alpha emitter, we can measure the alpha emission from the filters, and we can estimate what was the radiation of the filters few days after they were collected. Okay, so retrospectively, if you have filters 20, even 30 years old, you can measure what was the radiation at the time of sampling. And we had collocated samples, PM10 and PM2.5, And this is the alpha activity of particles on the PM2.5 and the alpha activity on the particles for PM10. You can see that 99.9% of the particle radioactivity, alpha activity, is associated with fine particles, because these are the ones that they have the accumulation mode where the radon progeny can go. And this also explains why PM2.5 is more toxic than PM10. In the case of the beta, the agreement is again high, but it's a little bit less, it's a little bit more noisy, because some of the soil particles like emit beta radiation, like potassium 40, for instance, is a beta emitter. So, you know, there is a correlation, but it's less strong as in the case of alpha radiation. How to do a national study to examine the effects of particle radioactivity. Unfortunately, we are limited to the EPA radiation network, which unfortunately does not really get enough funding these days, and is not at its best. But the early years, especially up to 2017, 18, they had collected many samples. They have about 150, 120 sites across the United States. Originally, this network was created to capture any kind of radioactivity from weapons tests, for nuclear accidents. More recently, after 2001, September 11, for any kind of terrorist attacks. And what they did, they collected field particles on a TSP, and after they collect, they let the filter to cool down. A hot filter is supposed to the filter that emits radiation that comes from radon, and then they measure the long-lived beta. And the reason is that they want to get rid of the radon and see whether there is any kind of anthropogenic radionuclides. We took the beta measurements from the RadNet. We developed an ensemble model with different base learners, and then that fit to the ensemble model. We had all these predictors: radon, radon emanation, anthropogenic emissions, nuclear plants, coal power plants, special variables, weather, the beta filters from RadNet. So it was kind of similar to what we do with PM10. And we developed a national model for beta between 2000 and 2017. And on the left here, you see the 2000, I cannot see, I think it's 2004. Yeah, 2004, 2010, and 16. The annual and the seasonal, you see that the levels are higher during the winter because the boundary layer is lower. Radon emanates, mixes with particles, makes them radioactive. So during the winter, we have more radiation. And also you can see that more recently, we have less particle radioactivity as we had before. The reason is to make particle radioactivity, you need radon and you need particles. And as we reduce the particles because of the successful policies we have implemented, the particle radioactivity goes down, although radon is a natural product and it's constant more or less, okay? So here we just have a paper in press. I think it's, I don't remember the journal. We took the continental USA between 2000 and 2017. We estimated the grand averages of PM2.5, the green line, And you can see that on average, we have about 2.5% decrease over time that we know, because of the cleaning of the air. And if we do the same trend, we'll see that the beta has decreased, the particle radioactivity has decreased about 0.9 per year. So percent. So now, if we take the ratio of particle radioactivity to PM 2.5, we see what? We see that the particles become more radioactive with time. So let's say if we believe, if I believe that the hypothesis that particle radioactivity is responsible for the particle toxicity, one would expect that as the particle levels go down, the response to exposure curve will become more sharp, right? So this might explain why, as the levels go down, we find that the response is getting larger, and this could explain why. And this is another way to say the same thing I just said. This shows the gross beta particle radioactivity over PM 2.5 when the PM is 21 micrograms per cubic meter between 18 and 21, 15, 18. And what you see here, that as the levels go down, the relative activity of particles increases, okay? So if the theory about particle radioactivity is true, then you would expect, that these particles are far more toxic than these particles, okay? So now I mentioned that we want to know what happens when people breathe the particles. And you remember I said that the radioactivity is much higher for the fresh particles. So we developed a method that it's a filter, collects particles, and above the filter we have a scintillation cell which is connected to a Geiger, and this can measure alpha radiation, but you can measure beta radiation if you want. So real time, we collect particles and we measure their radioactivity. So we are about to submit this paper for publication. These are two collocated, we call this PARS, particle alpha radiation sampler. And you can see that there is a very nice correlation. Now, let's say that you collect particles and then you switch off the pump and you wait to see what is happening. Well, what's going to happen? You remember, we said that these fresh radionuclides, they have a short life. So the radioactivity that comes out from the filter will die off very fast. And if you take the log of the activity and plot it over the lapse time, and you do the calculations, you find that the half-life of the activity emitted from particles is about 40 minutes, which is a suggestion that the radioactivity that comes from the particles is because of the radon progeny. So here are some measurements. This is a house in Massachusetts with very high basement radon levels, about 5 to 7 picocuries. You see here 250 becquerel per cubic meter. This is the upstairs. This is summer, and this is winter. Once the house gets, tight in Massachusetts after October, homes are very tight, and you can see that the levels of radioactivity, particle radioactivity, increase. But also you can see that we have also a lot of particle radioactivity on the order of 50 becquerels per cubic meter during the winter in the outside air. So this kind of notion we have that radon is an indoor pollution problem, actually that's not true. Radon is emitted all the time outside and makes ambient particles radioactive, and actually over 50% of the particle radioactivity we inhale is related to ambient air. Okay, and this percentage can go very high if your house does not have radon, and can be very low if your house has radon. This is just some fresh measurements from a couple of days ago, a few days ago. So the blue is a site, ambient site. We have in Framingham, counts per minute from the filter, and the orange is from Boston at the top of our university, our building. And you can see here that during the wildfire episodes, the particles, we captured a lot of radioactivity. And we really don't know if it's because during the wood fires, the high episodes, if we have more SCHESC where the radon progeny goes, or that the wood has some kind of radioactivity because the wood has uranium, has some other minerals, isotopes. We don't know yet, but I just wanted to share this with you. We need to go back and analyze this data. So I talked about exposure assessment because that's actually where we need to establish data to do epidemiology and toxicology. The health effects is easier because we have developed already cohorts, population data based on the PM. So if we have the radon and particle radioactivity exposure data, we can repeat everything we have done with PM25, and I'll show you in a few minutes. But before I go there, I would like to mention a couple of papers we have published with biomarkers. Unlike the PM that once we inhale, PM has sulfate that it dissolves, we cannot find it. It has copper, we eat copper. So it's very hard really to do dosimetry of PM. There are some papers that they show black carbon somewhere in the brain or in the lungs, but in reality, it's really very difficult to trace particles and do dosimetry with ambient particles. And of course, with ozone, NO2, that's out of question. In the case of particle radioactivity, we have radionuclides that we can measure with very high precision at very low levels, and we can trace them across the body. And this is a paper we published a few years ago, where we collaborated with friends from University of Sao Paulo Medical School. They have samples from cadavers, and they analyzed the lungs and the brain, the olfactory bulb, olfactory epithelium, and the frontal lobe. And to our surprise, we found much higher levels of polonium-210 in the brain as compared to the lungs. And the way we measure radioactivity in human tissues, you dry the sample, so it's dry tissue in becquerels. 1 becquerel is 1 alpha emission per second per kilogram of tissue. Okay, so in the lungs you have more clearance, so the particles stay longer. In the olfactory bulb, that the particles go through the olfactory epithelium, the olfactory nerve, they go there and they can stay forever, and they can emit radiation. And just to give you an idea, 1 becquerel per kilogram is 3.6 alpha particles per gram per hour. So in each gram, in each tissue gram in your brain, you will have 3 alpha particles. They have an energy of 5 mega electrovolts, which is a lot of energy. So they can damage, your brain until you die. You remember we talked about that the half-life of lead-210 is 20 years. So it will take 10 times the half-life for that thing to go away, which is going to be 200 years, well after you die. And then we collaborated with the same group, and they took placenta tissues, and they measured the polonium-210 from the mother side and the child side, the fetus side. And what we found that the levels are high, again expressed in becquerels per gram, and also they are both from both sides of the placenta, which means that there is not much protection for the child. Now, since we're talking about lead-210, I don't have the time to go through, but probably it's the most toxic substance that exists. It's 250,000 times more toxic than hydrogen cyanide, which is very toxic. And this is the reason Putin uses polonium-210 to poison his enemies. And with polonium, if you drink tea with few micrograms of polonium, you will start having all sorts of effects. It's very hard to see that you are poisoned with radiation because the alpha particles don't go from inside the human body to outside. So basically, it's very hard to detect the poisoning, but the body deteriorates until death. So polonium is quite serious. And if we start seeing polonium in the brains and the placenta, then something is wrong. So now let's talk about the health effects. I mentioned to you that, that once we have the models, the sky is the limit. We can do everything we have done with particles. And that's what we did. Let's show you some highlights. Mortality. The first paper we published back in 2018, we took mortality PM 2.5 estimates across the United States and different counties. And then we took these estimates and we meta-regressed them on the county radon levels. And that time we had the Lawrence Berkeley laboratory data. As I mentioned to you, they are by county and there is no special variability. And what we found that for 10 micrograms per cubic meter in counties which were below the 10th percentile for radon, 0.6 picocuries per liter, the mortality increase per 10 micrograms per cubic meter of particles was about 1.95. For the same exposure to particles for counties that they were above the 19th percentile, which is 6.3 picocuries per liter, the mortality increased to 3.7, so almost doubled. So that was kind of the first evidence to show that radon modifies the effects of particles, and you would expect that in areas where radon is higher, the particles are more toxic. And this might explain why, for instance, California particles are less toxic than particles in the Midwest. Okay, that could explain. And so since we found the effects of radon, we thought maybe we can do an epidemiology of just radon. And we took Medicare data in the Mid-Atlantic and Northeastern regions, 63 counties. Again, we used the Lawrence Berkeley Laboratory county radon. This was a 14 years follow-up study between 2000 and 2033, over 40 million of person years. And these are beneficiaries of Medicare, so it's mortality after 65 years. Used Poisson survival analysis. We study the effects of radon, but also we control for PM2.5. So we found that radon, for an IQR of the log of radon, we had an increase in mortality of 0.61%. For COPD, 1.72%, congestive heart failure, 1.67%, myocardial infarctions, 1.08. It was not statistically significant, and stroke was was high, but it was barely statistically significant. And for diabetes, we found quite high, the highest actually statistically significant response. And as I said, in these models, we controlled for PM2.5. So in a more recent study, which was published last year, we studied the synergistic effects of particle radioactivity, beta. Unfortunately, we don't have alpha for these models, and that's the reason we use beta. But we do believe that alpha is the property that we should measure. We have shown that beta and alpha correlate, however, so at least that's the reason we want to use beta as a surrogate of particle radioactivity. So what we do here, this is mortality in Massachusetts between 2001 and 2015, almost 750,000 of non-accidental deaths. We had residential address and the cause of death, ICD, 10. And also we study CVD, MI, and stroke. We use spatial temporal models for both PM2.5 and the model I showed you earlier, that they can give us exposure by year, zip code. We use two methods, difference of differences, which is to reduce the potential for confounding, and generalized linear models. And here are the results for a IQR of 2.82 micrograms per cubic meter increase in PM2.5. We compare the toxicity of particles at the 10th percentile of particle radioactivity, and the median, and the 90th percentile. And you can see that when the particle radioactivity is high, PM2.5 is much more toxic. For CVD, for myocardial, again the same. For stroke, again the same. And non-accidental all causes, again the same. So this paper provides direct evidence that particle radioactivity really modifies the effects of PM2.5 as far as the CVD mortality is concerned and the total non-accidental mortality. So, oops, why I want? Okay, sorry, I just, okay. The SCEHSC study is the inner city study in Massachusetts that recruits asthmatic children from minority communities, underrepresented communities. These kids, they have very high asthma rate. So we took data which were collected for another purpose, of course, for children between 3 and 15 years and age of 8 years. I'm sorry, age 8. And so these are self-identified as Black children, white, mixed, and other race. And we use the radon and exposure and asthma diagnosis as well. And we found that based on the radon exposures the last 12 to 24 months, the odds to have higher rate of asthma, no, I'm sorry, this was absences, school absences was higher for radon. I confused the study with the next study I will show you, I apologize. This is asthma symptoms, and this is in press. and gives the incidence rate ratio for 1 month before and 2 months before. And this is based on the 14-day symptom diaries, and the children fill up, and basically at the end of the 14 days, they bring them to the school. And here you can see that there was an association between radon and asthma symptoms. And this is kind news because we did not really expect radon to be related to asthma. However, if radon can cause cancer, why not asthma exacerbations? Perinatal outcomes. There is a Massachusetts registry that goes between 2001 and, in this study, 2016, almost 750,000 pregnant women. We know the address at delivery, and based on the zip code, we estimated radon exposure. And we did 2 studies. One study was for gestational diabetes, and the other was gestational hypertension. And here we have, on the left, we have first trimester, second trimester, and third trimester of association between particle radioactivity and gestational diabetes mellitus. And the odds ratios are on the right here, 1.03, 1.1, and 1.4. So for the same study, we did not find an association between PM2.5 and gestational diabetes. For the same cohort, we study gestational hypertension. And here now we use radon by zip code and by county, actually, and zip code. And the red is the unadjusted for PM2.5, and the green is the adjusted for PM2.5. For some reason, we found that when we adjust for PM2.5, the effects of radon become stronger. And we did not find an interaction in both adjusted and unadjusted models between PM2.5 and radon. So again, this shows that you can have adverse perinatal outcomes. And also, just now we finished a study with Michelle Bell from Yale, where she found for her Connecticut registry an association between lower birth weight and radon. I don't think I have the time to go through this, so I'm just showing you a collage of the papers of the last 5 years. I'll just read the titles: ambient radioactivity and gestational diabetes. I just show you oxidative stress and inflammation in the Framingham study. Effects of particle gamma radiation and oxidative stress in a COPD cohort we held in Massachusetts. Blood pressure and particle radioactivity in the normative aging study. For the same study, we found effects on hemoglobin concentration. Ventricular arrhythmias in a cohort or the panel of ICD patients with ICD. We found associations with both PM2.5 and particle radioactivity. Lung function for the NAS study and particle radioactivity. Another paper on lung function and in the COPD cohort. And another paper on the normative age study and renal function from the group in Columbia University. So there are more papers that I don't have the time to go through, But closing, I would like to say that we have tested a new hypothesis using existing tools. We just had to do the exposure models. We received some funding. In general, it's very hard these days to convince funding people to do things that you think are important, but they don't think that they are important. I'm sure many of you have experienced this, have had this experience. We have published population studies, cohort studies, biomarkers. We think that we need to collect in the future. It would be good to have monitoring networks that they collect real-time, short-lived radionuclides to estimate the radiation. And also, I did not have the time to discuss today, but we had some indoor and outdoor papers. As I told you, that particle radioactivity is both related to indoor and outdoor air. So overall, one can say that radon is not just an indoor pollutant. Radon is not just a cancer risk. PM controls reduce particle radioactivity. And there are, in some studies, it's not very consistent across studies. Sometimes we find interactions and sometimes we find independent effects. That's all I had to say. And I would be happy to answer questions. Sorry for taking so long.
Petros, thanks a lot. This is a real tour de force, really interesting work. So this is open for questions from the audience. Yemi?
Yes. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, I did have a question. The first off, I'm not a radon expert whatsoever. However, I did want to know your geographic scale that you selected. You guys decided on county level as well as zip code level. Have you all thought about doing block level and block group level? And if so, why or why not?
It would be nice. We need more data. It would be nice. I think we just want to get people excited about this, and I'm sure many people will start thinking a little bit better about radon. Nowadays, for instance, there are, with $100 on Amazon, you can get a radon monitor. So I think we should really have sensors of radon everywhere we are.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Shagwa?
Sorry, I'm outside, so the cell phone is a little bit slow. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can, of course.
The results are quite interesting because it kind of overlap with a lot of the findings of PM 2.5 exposure. So have you are you aware of, or have you done any research looking for how does radon associations with these different outcomes contribute to the PM 2.5 exposure findings? Like how much percentage or something like that was explained by the radon?
Yeah.
We know that PM 2.5 is so complicated with a lot of components. How important the radon to the PM 2.5?
I know I'm biased. I think a large fraction of particle toxicity is related to radioactivity, which is associated with radon. Again, this is personal opinion and the people we work here. I think there are more studies we need to do, and I think it would be good that other universities start doing this kind of research, because I think if we have information from different people with different locations with different tools and skills, I think that will make the story stronger.
Yes, that we can continue the discussion about the HIPAA trial. Like let's think about something we can do.
Yes, absolutely.
So Petros, it looked to me like, I mean, you know, went by quite quickly. There was a lot of information, but when you compare, the toxicity, the effects of PM with low radiation and high radiation, how does the effect of radon progeny and radiation compare with the effect of PM 2.5 itself? Is this thinking to your point of, is this important? I mean, is this an effect that, if you were to do an attributable risk or a burden of disease assessment, would you see deaths from radon progeny in particles to be on a par with the effect of PM 2.5 independently?
Yes. As we speak, we are using the mortality rates, and we find that the effects of particle beta radioactivity are similar to the effects of PM 2.5. And sometimes when you put PM 2.5, the effects of beta go away, or vice versa. So I think there is some evidence that we can start counting the deaths associated with particle radioactivity very easily. I mean, there are 3-4 papers, but I think it's kind of obvious that this is not just about lung cancer, for sure.
Hi, yeah, my name is Mustafizur Rahman. I'm a postdoc here. So my question is that when you are showing the plot, especially the spatial map for radon, I see the radon is very high in the Midwest. So what is the reason for that, for this high concentration in the Midwest?
There are more basaltic, and because of the underneath the soil there is more uranium, and because of the geology, merely the geology. Whereas if you have more sandy and more carbonates, you have less radon. So there is nothing to do about with the sources of pollution. It's natural. I must say that the effects we see are well below the 4 picocuries per liter that the EPA guidelines are to mitigate the houses. And also the levels we see here are a little bit lower than what they see in Europe, Central and Eastern Europe.
So when you also, in your study, you also found that the radon activity is high in the low PM 2.5 concentration. And in our PM 2.5 studies, we found that the exposure response curve is very steep at the low concentration, and it's leveling up at high concentration. So is that because of the spatial pattern, like the PM 2.5 concentration is also low in the Midwest, considered to California and northern United States and east part of the United States. So is that because only the radon concentration is high in the Midwest and PM 2.5 concentration is low in the Midwest? That's why you found the more radioactivity at low concentration, or any other
It can be two reasons. It can be both. It can be because if you have lower particles, the amount of radon progeny per mass of particles is higher. But also if you have higher radon, as you have in the Midwest, you have higher radioactivity. I talk in that graph, I talk about the ratio of beta activity to PM 2.5. And what I said is that the less the particles you have, for the same for the same amount of radon, you get more radioactivity. And that figure was for the entire United States, was not just for Midwest. So it was about the average USA.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
So we're just at 1 o'clock.
I apologize. I wanted, you mentioned to me that I had to stop at 15 to 1.
This was great. I think we've had a rich discussion. I think I know Shanghua Jiawen, if you could ask your question now, or if it's relevant to the discussion later, we could take a break now, or people. I think why don't we do this for people who want to stay for the discussion of Shanghua's grant and potential collaboration. You're welcome to do so, and we'll respect people's time, and those who have other things to do, you can drop off now. And Petros, we could you want to take a 5-minute break, or should we just continue?
We can continue. We continue.
Yeah. Okay. Good. So
I'm still out in the clinic. It's especially unexpected long. We have been waiting for an hour, but while I'm waiting, how about let's maybe, Rob, do you have any topic like you particularly want to touch base before we?
no. I mean, I think this
discussion?
this is your opportunity to start a conversation with Petros Shanghua, and
Yeah,
you'd mentioned you have some slides you want to show.
Yeah.
You
So
take it away.
maybe
Other
I
people can
can
chime in as they see fit. And I'm going to apologize. I have to leave a little early, Petros, because I have
That's okay.
another meeting.
Yeah. How about I let Wu to show the slides? Wu, would you want to lead the presentation of the slides?
Sure, I can do that. I can't share my screen.
Oh,
Dominica-
yeah. Who's
I
the
made you the
host?
co-host, Will. You should be able now.
Dominica, can you
Okay.
make
Oh, thank you. Oh, sorry.
So Patrick, this is probably not new to you. You already heard a little bit briefly
Yeah, last year.
during
Yeah.
our center.
Mhm.
And we're just gonna refresh this design idea to you and some of the new pilot that we are putting together. And after especially heard your seminar presentation, I have several thoughts. I would like to get your ideas. Maybe do you mind let Wu maybe introduce our studies again and some of the new updates first for the HIPAA trials?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Wu, it's your turn.
Yeah. Basically now